Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I'm pleased actually to see you in the chair because of the fact that I'm going to take us down memory lane a little, and I know that you were in this chamber in 2000, March 1st, when I actually brought forward a private member bill, and in this legislature, March of 2000, called the Traffic Safety Amendment Act 2000. And Speaker, I'm glad to see that you do remember that. And at that particular time, and yes, of course, I happened to bring forward a private member bill to talk about bringing it from 0.08 to 0.5. So we're going back 11 years. You have to listen. What the idea of the bill was to bring the awareness of what drinking and driving can do to you in this province. And at that particular time, I talked about drivers who were over 0.05 to have a 24-hour suspension. And there was great debate in that legislature. There was great things pointed out at that particular time in regards to this particular piece. And I know the member from Vegreville Viking will remember this because he was part of the Assembly at that particular time. And I recall having a great deal of debate with them on this particular piece of legislation. And the former RCMP commissioner at that particular time, a fellow by the name of Assistant Commissioner McDermott, who was not real happy with me at that particular time when I brought this piece of legislation forward in response to the RCMP. And we had a great deal of discussion in caucus on this particular piece of legislation. And I see some of my colleagues who've been around, and I have to tell you, was not received with a great deal of love and support at that particular time in our caucus at all. And so as a member of the Progressive Conservative Party at that time, going around and talking to my colleagues about particularly supporting me on this piece of legislation, just to bring the idea and awareness of the effects of drinking and driving in this province and all of the effects and all of the tragedies that had occurred. When I brought this piece of legislation forward, Speaker, I had actually dedicated the bill to constituents and who had been killed in a tragic accident near Morley, Alberta. And on behalf of them, their ultimate goal on this was not to penalize 0.5 to 0.8, but really to make people in this province aware the seriousness of what happens when you drink and drive. In my speaking notes, and one of the things that I was very adamant about was the idea of educating the public and to tell people what happens when you drink and drive and the serious effects of that. The 24-hour suspension that, I have to say, Speaker, that this particular piece of legislation died on the order paper. We didn't get to vote on it, but sometime after that, obviously, we brought in the 24-hour suspension, and I can tell you I was then lucky enough to go into the position of the Solicitor General from the years 2001 to 2004. And had the opportunity in my travels as a Solicitor General to do ride-alongs with the police and listen to the police in this province that were very concerned about the issue of drinking and driving, and I can tell you more so about impaired driving. Also had the opportunity when I was the Solicitor General to be at check stops, which I thought were very interesting as we pulled suspected drunk drivers over, watched them go through blowing over 0.8, and then realizing the seriousness of the situation, and at that particular time what would happen to them going through the process after they had been charged. Mr. Speaker, it's 2011. We're 11 years later, and we have a piece of legislation that's been brought forward into this Assembly. And I question, as I've listened intently to everybody else, what consultation has been done. In 2007, when I had the honor of chairing the Safer Cities Task Force report, I traveled the province for 6 months straight, listening to what Albertans wanted. One of the number one issues was about drinking and driving. But it wasn't about 0.5, it was about driving over the legal limit of 0.8. And what, as a task force, or as a government, when I was chairing that task force, what we were going to do about the seriousness of that particular issue. And in all good faith, I tabled the legislation under the auspices of the then Premier from Vegreville Viking. And it's interesting when you go through all of the recommendations in this particular task force report, that, I can tell you quite frankly, was accepted right across this country as one of the best reports in regards to how to tackle crime within the province. In this report, we pointed out the importance of doing some advertising and some public awareness in regards to the effects of drinking and driving and what the devastating effects it can do in this province. Accepted by the government all of the recommendations, including the report about setting up a safer communities, which we now hear the Premier talk about, and she brags about as her 2 years of Justice Minister, and she talks about bragging about what they're doing now as Premier. We've done some research, and I'm still looking for all of the public awareness advertising that is supposed to be done and was recommended that we do in regards to bringing the effects of drinking and driving to Albertans, and so that they can understand what's going on with drinking and driving. I don't recall, or I don't remember if anybody recalls the terrific success that ADAC did on a TV commercial several years ago on the bowl commercial, where you had these kids puking their guts out into the toilet, talking about the drinking and driving. One of the most successful commercials done on bringing drinking and driving awareness to young kids. Won numerous awards. But that's the kind of impact that people need to see, as much as we don't want to see some child barfing into a toilet bowl, that is very effective in regards to telling people. It would be no different than probably showing a drunk driver smashing into a family and killing them, quite frankly, and what happens. I think what's missing through this whole conversation is what we call the elephant in the room to speak. And what I think that elephant, quite frankly, is, what are we doing with the chronic drunk drivers in this province that are 20% of the problem, that cause 80% of the work for the police in this province? And this bill, quite frankly, doesn't touch that issue at all. The people being targeted here are not Alberta's most dangerous drivers. It's the chronic, quite frankly, abusers of alcohol that we should be targeting. The people, like myself, or you, Mr. Speaker, if I may, that like to have a glass of wine at dinner. No. Or, sorry, anyone who likes to have a glass of wine for dinner is not the ones that we should be responsible, and that we want to have to target. I mean, I'd like to have, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to have a glass of wine with dinner. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I weigh 100 pounds, And if I have a glass of wine, I can guarantee you that if I'm sitting at the table and I want to, if we were deciding that we were going to have me be tested in regards to blowing, I bet you if I had the Kager 9-ounce glass of wine, I'd be at 0.5. For sure. If I was sitting with the Minister of Human Services and he did the same test, I'm not quite sure that he would be reaching that same alcohol level as I am, to be very honest with you.
I don't think he would either.
So,
Maybe he will be 0.01. Are you going
where?
to order on that date?
So, Mr. Speaker, I guess what I'm trying to do is, if the government is really serious and they really want to start targeting the chronic drunk drivers, then let's spend our time and our effort on those chronic drunk drivers.
Yes.
Which I, quite frankly, have to admit, that's what the police want. They want the ability to have check stops out there, having their police officers pulling people over on a Friday night that are seriously inebriated and that we have to get off the street. They don't want to have the time where the Minister of Human Resources and his wife are out for a nice quiet dinner, coming home, pulling them over and saying, "Mister, could you please blow into this so we can see if you're at 0.5. I can tell you that our police in this province want to take care of the chronic drunk drivers in this province that have caused more problems in this province and more devastation for families after they have wiped out 4 kids from Grand Prairie, the 6 kids that encouraged me or incited me to come in and bring forward some legislation. What's interesting, Mr. Speaker, when I start going through Hansard, and you start going through the speaking notes in Hansard, and I reflect back on what people say, and I reflect back, and then probably the member from Edmonton Centre will remember the member from Calgary, I think it was Buffalo, Gary Dixon. Who was previously in this legislature by the name of a fellow by the name of Gary Dixon. And I started reading through what he had to say in Hansard, and I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, he's got it bang on. He talks about the 2 categories of drivers who are constantly causing the problem. This was statistics in 2000. I would like to know the government statistics on what they have from 2000 to 2010 in regards to what is happening with the 0.8 over and what is happening with the 0 to 5 to 0.8. Because obviously something tweaked to the government. If they thought that this particular piece of legislation was so important, then I seriously, as someone who stood in this legislature in 2000 and stood in this legislature talking about the importance of looking at a 24-hour suspension, they have got to have some knowledge in regards to, even from 2000 to 2010, on some statistics on the fatalities that have occurred from someone driving who was driving between the BAC of 0.5 to 0.8. There has to be some sort of information to make the government aware and the seriousness to bring forward a piece of legislation.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We're now into Standing Order 29-2A. Should there be a member who wishes to participate, the Honourable Member for Airdrie-Chestermere.
The Honourable Member was in the middle of eloquently speaking about this piece of legislation. I would like to ask her to please finish her thought, as I thought I was paying rapt attention to it.
The Honourable Member, if you wish.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess, Mr. Speaker, just to conclude, and someone who's, I have to tell you, struggled on this, because as I indicated to you earlier, I brought forward a bill in 2000. I wanted to see the 24-hour suspension. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that, Mr. Speaker. If I'm driving down the street after having my mega 9-ounce glass of wine at the Keg, and I get pulled over, and the officer says to me, member or dear driver, you are blowing over 0.5, and we really think that you shouldn't be driving home, and I think it's a really good idea for you to pull over and to park your car. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? I'm going to say, yes, sir, because he obviously thinks that maybe there's some question. On the other hand, if I'm driving home after having 2 of those mega glasses of wine at the Keg, and I'm so inebriated, then I guess I should be off the street and I should face the consequences of my decisions for being so stupid to knowingly drink that much, knowingly very well that I could be killing somebody on the street. So I guess when I'm asking for the government, as someone who brought this forward 10 years ago, please show me the data that you have to say that it is important for us to start bringing it down from 205 or from 0.5 to 0.8, and we have conclusive data that shows this. The Safer Communities Task Force was set up specifically to find out what was going on in this province, what needed to be done in regards to legislation in this province, what the hot spots in this province were as far as for the policing. I mean, I can show you all of the recommendations, quite frankly, why the need for the safer communities. But I can tell you, I don't recall anybody coming to me or talking to me on the Safer Communities Task Force about 0.5 to 0.8. So the Safer Community Task Force was set up to do some consultation. They have a whack of money in that Safer Community Secretariat. They must have the data to prove that this is something that really needs to be done over more mental health beds, more drug and alcohol beds for our kids that are suffering from drug and alcohol. I mean, there's 27 recommendations that I think the dollars can be used for that would give us a bigger impact. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to hearing what the government has to say, and at that point I'll sit down and listen.
Other questions under this segment of 29-2A? There being none, shall I call on the Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood?
Thank you.